Hey folks, welcome back to the Dennis Miller Show. We're talking for the entire hour to Christopher Hitchens and Pastor Douglas Wilson about their new documentary, Collision, for the entire hour. Explores whether or not Christianity is good for the world. As we went to our last break, Pastor Douglas Wilson had just put down his mission statement, and prior to that, Christopher Hitchens had put his burn down the mission statement on the table. Now let's find out how these two guys intersect. Doug, Christopher, whoever wants to field this, who's on whose radar first, and how do you come to meet each other?
Well, I suggest a compromise. Why don't we just burn down half the mission?
There you go. All right.
Well, it was in a way my idea, so I might as well quickly tell you. When I published God is Not Great, which I might add, if I may, is now available in paperback at fine bookstores everywhere.
You may.
With a very reasonable price and a very handsome cover.
How many pence is it?
And as is our book Collision, which is the written record of our debate. I told my publisher that I didn't want the usual sort of New York liberal publishers book tour, sort of Union Square, New York, Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Berkeley, and so on, though I love doing all those things. But I wanted to start in the South. I wanted to ask for a challenger at every stop we made. I didn't want to just read from my own book in a bookstore, but to have a debate, preferably in a church or a meeting hall, and started off like that. And gradually people began to take me up on it. I launched the book at the Arkansas Book Fair, and the best response I got was from Pastor Wilson, who suggested that we meet cybernetically in the online pages of Christianity Today, and do a weekly exchange on the first principles, which they kindly published, and which is the meat of the book that we've jointly produced. And then we made a film out of the, I won't call it a dog and pony show, will I? We made it out of the last leg of our tour from on the East Coast. And that is the genesis, if I can phrase it like that.
Pastor Wilson, what did you make of your initial reaction to God is Not Great? And if your opinion is, I don't know, Christopher is a formidable advocate. Has your opinion changed since you first read the book?
Yeah, Christopher floats like a butterfly and stings like a bee.
Yes, he does.
And I read through God is Not Great, and I believe that even though Christopher's here listening to this, I believe that Christopher is very quick and witty, funny, and preeminently readable. I enjoy reading him. The enjoyment could only be increased if he were only right, you know.
Yes, I understand that, but isn't it interesting that a man, it is so well ordered. I read a Hitchens piece that I'm, and listen, there's some I'm completely in his thrall on. I believe exactly what he believes. This one not so much, but I can't put it down. I'll tell you, it's so well reasoned. It perks you up, right?
My father used to quote a little poem when I was a kid. He said that once was a girl who had a curl right in the middle of her forehead. When she was good, she was very, very good, and when she was bad, she was horrid.
Do you know the Dorothy Parker version of that, by the way? There was a little girl, and she had a little curl right in the middle of her forehead. When she was good, she was very, very good, and when she was bad, she had this lace-trimmed, orange-colored negligee with a scalloped... That was when she worked in the fashion department of Vanity Fair.
Well, listen, I would have granted you guys both all excess laminates to the Algonquin table after hearing your brief chat so far, but tell me about your initial exchange about the Good Samaritan story. Who wants to pick that one up and run a little?
Well, should we do it in order?
Sure.
Well, I say that one of the things about the Good Samaritan story is it shows that Christianity has nothing to do with it, because Jesus is telling the story, if it is indeed him, and there were no Christians then. I mean, not even his disciples can really be called Christians, since they hadn't read the New Testament. And he's talking about a story of pre-Christian solidarity shown by one person to a stranger from whom he can expect no return. And so it has in common with a lot of morality that it can be found long before monotheism. It can be found in the Golden Rule, for example, comes in the Analects of Confucius. And so I said, I don't think I owe that to Christianity. It's not down to the cult of the human sacrifice and vicarious redemption that I know about the Good Samaritan, or one might as well say the good person. But Douglas was able to correct me or enlarge the scope of the question on the meaning of the word Samaritan, so I'll let him do that.
Parry that thrust.
Okay. Basically, when Jesus told the story, it's popularly interpreted as a be nice to people story, sort of an inspirational thing that would run in guideposts. And this shows you that we can all lend a helping hand and help out and be sweet and make the world better. And Jesus was telling an ethnically loaded parable. The Samaritan was a despised half-breed, and the fellow who's beat up by the side of the road was a Jew, and it was a priest that walked by first, a fellow Jew, and then the Levite, a fellow Jew, and that's because if they came into contact with a dead body, they would have become ritually unclean, wouldn't have been able to do their duty to God in the temple and that sort of thing. And then a Samaritan, a despised half-breed, comes by and helps him. And it's as though Jesus were telling this story set in 1950s Birmingham, Alabama, and the guy beat up was a white guy, and the white preacher and televangelist and the deacon walked by, and then a black man stops and helps him. So Jesus was telling an inflammatory parable, not a sweetie nice parable. That's the first thing. The second thing, going back to this, so this doesn't turn into a love fest, I do want to differ with Christopher on one thing, and that is that it doesn't matter that there were no Christians yet, because Christians don't believe that the truth was invented when Jesus came. They believe that the truth was fulfilled. So if you should be suspicious if your religious group, founded in 1998, and that's as far back as you go, that should arouse your suspicions, because if the truth doesn't go all the way, if there isn't an option to believe the truth throughout the whole history of our race, then there's a problem. So Christians believe that Christ was the fulfillment of all the Old Testament prophecies and is the fulfillment of everything that the prophets predicted. So there was a people of God 1,000 years before Christ, and so on.
All right.
Well, that of course is exactly where I find.
Christopher, hang on for 1 second. I'm up against the hard break here at the bottom of the hour. We're with Christopher Hitchens and Pastor Douglas Wilson for the entire hour. I've got Scott and Anthony up on the board. Please hang in there. I'll get to your calls right after this. Their documentary is Collision. This is the Dennis Miller Show.